Now let's bring in David Gregory, moderator of Meet the Press, and NBC's Tom Brook, who also had a long weekend this weekend. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
First of all, David, very quickly, does this deal have the votes to pass the House?
I think it does. I think there's problems on the left and the right. You heard from Emmanuel Cleaver that liberals are not happy with this deal. There are going to be some hardcore Republicans, Tea Party folks who aren't happy either. Michelle Bachmann, who's running for president, said she won't vote for it. But I think with Boehner saying he's for it, it should get through.
You talk about the Tea Party. It's been no secret that the conservative elements, especially the Tea Party elements, freshmen, have had an indication, had an impact on this struggle. So the question I think some people might be asking is, do you think that members of the Tea Party caucus know how to govern, or do they understand that standing up for a cause is not the same as governing?
Well, I don't think that you can separate the two. The fact is that they were elected to pursue the goals that they took before their constituents and said, this is what we believe in, this is why we're going to Washington, and they have changed the tenor of the debate there and the details of it. I don't believe anyone woke up this morning and said, this is a peachy deal. We've dodged a bullet, but we still have a long way to go. And anyone who's out there with a mortgage that's in trouble or doesn't have a job, this doesn't solve their problem. We still have systemic issues within the American economy. The Tea Party members came here under fair terms. They said, this is what we want to do. This has been a big morning for them so far, but we have miles to go before we sleep.
Well, what's to stop this same caucus, the Tea Party caucus, from blocking the work of this new subcommittee without the threat of a default, David?
It's actually a good question. Without getting too technical about it, the point is this happens in two phases. That second phase could be pretty tricky, because that's where you heard David Plouffe just say, well, we might get some tax increases there. We're going to get tax reform there. Well, they don't have to do all of that in that committee. The bottom line is, in this package, they still didn't make the really hard decisions. Washington failed to make the hard decisions. Now, the president has an option. He could veto the extension of the Bush-era tax cuts at that point. So we could be headed for another showdown. And by the way, another showdown this fall, actually going into the Republican primaries and into the election year. So they left in place the major fights about the role of government, about taxes, about the deficit for the 2012 campaign.
Well, of that said, I mean, we heard Matt talk about the emotion, whether this had an emotional impact. What about an emotional impact on the recovery? In other words, is there potentially, even with what we think is now a deal, has there already been a negative impact on the economy?
Oh, that's what we don't know yet. But a lot of people, both in the private sector and the public sector, do worry that these cuts will take out what is an imperfect stimulus. We know that. But a lot of the money that is helping to prop up the economy right now is public money. It's government money. These cuts will pull that out or reduce a lot of those. The impact of that on what we know is a very fragile economy remains to be seen. And 2 years ago, I was with a group of very high-level CEOs. They thought the stimulus program would work. They thought by 10, midterm, late term, the economy would be back on the road to recovery. We learned last Friday that we're under 2% in terms of growth in this country. We have a very fragile situation. And how all of this will play out, no one can say with any clarity, because so many of the projections that we've made in the past have proved to be dead wrong.
How this will all play out politically is also a matter of debate. The pundits are already second-guessing who won, who lost. Can we even talk about those definitions after what we've seen this weekend?
I think, as Tom alludes to, it's early to do that at this stage, because this is not over. But there's no question. First of all, this was a failure to govern by both sides. So nobody comes out of this looking very good.
So who lost the least?
Well, I mean, look, Republicans came out. They drove the conversation about cutting the deficit. There are no tax increases in this. The president did not get what he wanted. He's got a very unhappy liberal base. So I think overall, as Tom was alluding to, Tea Party Republicans had a huge impact on this at the end of the day.
This is a new passage, Ann. I mean, in fact, they have changed the tone and the tenor of the debate in Washington and the economic reality of where we go from here if this continues to play out in the manner that it played out over the weekend.
Oh, really terrific to hear from both of you. Great perspective. Thank you so much, David Gregory.
President Obama surrenders. A deal to raise the federal debt ceiling is in the works. If it goes through, many commentators will declare the disaster was somehow avoided, but they will be wrong. For the deal itself, given the available information, is a disaster, and not just for President Obama and his party. It will damage an already depressed economy. It will probably make America's long-run deficit problem worse, not better. And most important, by demonstrating that raw extortion works and carries no political cost, it will take America a long way down the road to banana republic status. Start with the economics. We currently have a deeply depressed economy. We will almost certainly continue to have a depressed economy all through next year, and we will probably have a depressed economy through 2013 as well, if not beyond. Some people believe that the United States has entered a second recession. Indeed, slashing spending while the economy is depressed won't even help the budget situation much and might well make it worse. On one side, interest rates on federal borrowing are currently very low, so spending cuts now will do little to reduce future interest costs. On the other side, making the economy weaker now will also hurt its long-run prospects, which will in turn reduce future revenue. So those demanding spending cuts now are like medieval doctors who treated the sick by bleeding them and thereby made them even sicker. And then there are the reported terms of the deal, which amount to an abject surrender on the part of the president. First, there will be big spending cuts with no increase in revenue. Then a panel will supposedly make recommendations for further deficit reduction, and if these recommendations aren't accepted, there will be more spending cuts. Republicans will theoretically have an incentive to make concessions the next time around, because defense spending will be among the areas cut. But the GOP has just demonstrated its willingness to risk financial collapse unless it gets everything its most extreme members want. Why expect it to be more reasonable in the next round? In fact, Republicans will surely be emboldened by the way President Obama keeps folding in the face of the threats. He surrendered last December, extending all the BUSH tax cuts. He surrendered in the spring when they threatened to shut down the government, and he has now surrendered on a grand scale to raw extortion over the debt ceiling. There seems to be a pattern here. Did the president have any alternative this time around? Yes. First of all, he could and should have demanded an increase in the debt ceiling back in December. When asked why he didn't, he replied that he was sure that Republicans would act responsibly. Yes, great call. And even now, the Obama administration could have resorted to legal maneuvering to sidestep the debt ceiling, using any of several options. In ordinary circumstances, this might have been an extreme step, but faced with the reality of what is happening, namely raw extortion on the part of a party that, after all, only controls one house of Congress, it would have been totally justifiable. At the very least, President Obama could have used the possibility of a legal end run to strengthen his bargaining position. Instead, however, he ruled out all such options from the beginning. But wouldn't taking a tough stance have worried markets? In fact, an investor would have been reassured, not dismayed, by a demonstration that the president is willing and able to stand up to blackmail on the part of right-wing extremists. Instead, he has chosen to demonstrate the opposite. Make no mistake about it, what we're witnessing here is a catastrophe on multiple levels. Some say it is, of course, a political catastrophe for Democrats, who just a few weeks ago seemed to have Republicans on the run over their plan to dismantle Medicare. Now, President Obama has thrown all that away, and the damage isn't over. There will be more choke points where Republicans can threaten to create a crisis unless the president surrenders, and they can now act with the confident expectation that he will. In the long run, however, Democrats won't be the only losers. It could easily affect everyone. And what Republicans have just gotten away with calls our whole system of government into question. After all, how can American democracy work if whichever party is most prepared to be ruthless, to threaten the nation's economic security, gets to dictate policy? And the answer is, maybe it can't. In other words, America is still in a whole lot of trouble. No matter what they do or what they say, they are just kicking the can down the road. And this, too, is another sign of the times. A time of extraordinary changes, happenings, and events. It's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. Isaiah chapter 55. Listen, everyone that thirsts, come ye to the waters, and he that has no money, come ye, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk without money, and without price. 2. Wherefore do ye spend money for that which is not bread, and your labors for that which satisfies not? Listen diligently unto me, and eat ye that which is good, and let your souls delight itself in good things. Revelation chapter 11, verse 14. The second woe is past, and, behold, the third woe comes quickly. 15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The nations of this world are becoming the nations of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. 16. And the 24 elders, which sat before God on their seats, fell upon their faces, and worshipped God. 17. Saying, We give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which are, and was, and are to come, because thou hast taken to thee that great power, and has reigned. 18. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, but they should be judged. But thou should give reward unto thy servants, the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. 19. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings, and voices, and thunderings, and an earthquake, and great hail. Again, it's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled. Everything is connected, and everything is numbered. It's also called destiny or fate. And all these are more physical manifestations of the book of Revelation. Yes, it's time now. There is a spiritual side to everything.